Upon arriving at the destined high-rise apartment and speaking to the concierge, I was handed the keys to the room. They took the elevator reserved for the higher floors to the top floor room. Wow, how lovely. My sister-in-law was the first to dash through the open door, screaming in excitement. Let's get the unpacking done. But no one offered to help. It was expected, yet still infuriating. The movers placed the luggage where instructed, and I proceeded to unpack alone. My room will be the largest one. The bride gets the small storage room. My in-laws made such room assignments on their own, but I ignored them and continued my work. The room is really beautiful. It's perfect for our final home. Good for you. Eric and his family were all smiling broadly. It's like a dream to live in such a house. My sister-in-law said with tears in her eyes. It might be time for a revelation. Huh? Whose house are you talking about? Huh? My name is Abby Clarkson. I'm 32 years old. A freelance illustrator. Originally, I worked for a major publishing company. But I went independent and now mainly take on work from my former company, while also starting to work as a picture book author. I married Eric 2 years ago, and we began living together in the apartment I was living in. The reason we live in my house is that it's my property, and Eric, who was renting, moved in here. When I was a child, my parents died in a car accident. After that, I was raised by my grandparents. After graduating from college and getting a job, I bought this apartment. The payment was made with the compensation and insurance money received from my parents' accident. My grandparents raised me without touching that money and gave it to me when I graduated from college to use for myself. I bought this place because my grandparents went into a facility after they finished raising me. The couple had reserved a spot in a facility, intending not to burden me with caregiving. After much thought, I bought this apartment because it was accessible by a single train ride to my company and easy to visit my grandparents in their facility. My grandparents said there must be other ways to use the money, but I felt this was the best use for it. I have been living here for almost 10 years now. 10 years until I lost my parents, and 10 years with my grandparents. It's almost the same. It means I've spent a third of my life here. It's a home I've grown quite attached to. I met Eric at a friend's wedding after party. He was a colleague of my friend's husband. There were many of us of the same age, and from that time, a group of us started hanging out together. Eventually, a few couples formed, and some have gotten married. Eric and I were one of those couples. Eric was cheerful, and him just being around seemed to brighten the room. I was attracted to Eric from when we first met. I admired his cheerful nature, something I lacked, and thought he was a wonderful person. However, that was just Eric's public persona. And I soon came to know his other side after we got married. Eric, who was very gentlemanly while we were dating, turned out to be the type who believes in not feeding the fish once caught. No, it was worse than that. He was the type who wanted to make a meal out of the caught fish. Since I'm living in your house, you should be the one covering the living expenses. What do you mean? Even if I weren't living here, the expenses would be the same, right? So, you should continue covering them as you have been. Isn't that fair? Indeed, I've finished paying off my apartment and there's no mortgage left. However, as long as I live here, maintenance fees and repair funds are necessary. And there's also property tax. Plus, I'm paying for a parking spot because I have a car. So, those expenses would be there even if I wasn't, right? Well, yes, but then there shouldn't be any problem with you paying them as before. His argument seems reasonable at first, but is actually absurd. But Eric, you're going to be living here too. And we agreed to split the living expenses. I'd really appreciate it if you could contribute. When I said this, Eric's eyes narrowed angrily. You're such a greedy woman. A real miser. I never thought you were that kind of woman. I was so shocked, no words came out. I had thought it was only natural for us to be equals, living together as husband and wife. I had always assumed that we would share the expenses for our shared home. I'm not saying I won't pay a single penny. I'll of course pay half for what I use, but you're the owner of this house, right? So he means to say that since it's my property, I should bear the expenses. I'll pay for my own necessities, and isn't that okay? Reluctantly, I accepted his demand. At the beginning of our marriage, Eric did pay half of the living expenses as he said. However, only for the portions I billed him for. The electricity bill was this much this month. That's pretty high. Aren't you just wasting money working from home? I had quit my job to work as a freelancer while dating Eric. Though I sometimes go out for meetings and other engagements, I do most of my work from home. That seems unfair. Eric first complained about the utility bills. What's unfair? Well, I'm working outside almost all day. And yet, I have to pay for your share of the electricity bill when you're working from home? What an argument. I was too astonished to respond. I only use a bit of electricity when I come home and before I go to bed. So I shouldn't have to pay half, right? Following that logic, Eric started paying only a minimal amount. The same went for the gas and water bills. I tolerated it for the time being. Indeed, Eric was only home for a short time each day. The utility bills obviously increased with an additional person. But it's impossible to accurately determine who used how much of what. Despite his complaints, we were sharing the living expenses, so I silently accepted Eric's reasoning. Looking back, I'm appalled at how foolish it was, but at the time, I thought it was necessary. I decided it was better to endure this and maintain a peaceful marriage than to argue about such strange things from the start. Apart from money issues, Eric was as bright and fun as he had been before we got married. Of course, the money issue always bothered me, but we weren't struggling to live. And I thought it was more important to spend our time together pleasantly. But that supposedly happy time began to feel increasingly precarious. More overtime, seriously, they need to cut it out. Eric said grumpily, and his return home became later and later. Are you okay with all that overtime? There's a guideline that says more than a certain number of hours a month is dangerous. I think the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare said to keep it under 45 hours a month. You don't get it. Those are just superficial numbers. A good salesperson doesn't just work the hours that can be clocked on a time card. He said this in a demeaning tone. You've had times when you stayed up all night to meet a work deadline, haven't you, Abby? Yes, that's true. That's what I mean. Don't be misled by just the apparent numbers. I graduated from an art college and went straight into working as an illustrator. So, I really don't know anything about sales jobs. I had no choice but to believe what he firmly stated. I understand, but please don't overdo it. I know. You're so kind, Abby, I'll watch out for myself. Eric said this as he gently hugged me. I tried to force myself to believe in Eric's kindness. As if believing was the only way to keep my heart at peace. A year passed while Eric gradually betrayed me. People can react when pain is inflicted all at once. But it seems they become numb when pain is inflicted gradually. The accumulation of Eric's betrayals had grown quite significant. Yet I felt as if I was just tolerating a little every day. In other words, I was turning a blind eye to maintain peace. Then, suddenly, a significant event happened. My family is coming over to stay here for a bit, is that okay? One morning, Eric suddenly mentioned this. Your father and mother? And my sister too. I had visited Eric's family home in the countryside once before we got married. It was a small, old house where his parents lived together. At that time, I couldn't meet his sister since she had already married and moved out. There was a message from her saying she had plans and couldn't come, asking to pass her regards. Since we didn't have a wedding ceremony and only took photos. That was the only time I met Eric's parents. Of course, I had no opportunity to meet his sister. Our friends threw us a celebration party, but I hadn't met any of Eric's relatives through such events. I myself didn't have much interaction with my relatives, so I didn't find it particularly odd. Now, suddenly, his parents and sister were coming to visit. It wasn't strange for them to want to check in after a year of marriage. Without any doubt, I agreed to Eric's request. A week later, as communicated, Eric's family arrived at our home. This is Eric's house? It's not very spacious, is it? This was the first comment as Eric's family entered our home. It's not spacious, of course. This house was originally bought for me to live in alone. It has 3 bedrooms and a large living dining area. One empty room, which is almost always used as a guest room. And the other rooms were used as a workroom and a bedroom. When Eric started living with me, he wanted a space to work from home. So I gave up my workroom for Eric's study, and now I work from the living room. The space is sufficient for 2 people to live comfortably without any inconvenience. As I was thinking this, my mother-in-law entered first, followed by my sister-in-law, whom I was meeting for the first time. Really, it's smaller than I thought. Are you going to live here together from now on? It's small, but bear with it. There's a saying, anywhere you live becomes your home. Well, it's better than nothing. We'll manage to live here. Live here? I wondered how long they planned to stay. As I was ponderously thinking this, Eric spoke up with an irritated voice. Hey, what are you spacing out for? Hurry up and help carry my parents' stuff. Oh, sorry. Which ones are their luggage? I expected maybe a small amount of luggage for a brief stay, like a duffel bag. Looking inside the entrance, I found nothing. Where are you looking? Outside, outside. In a rush, I looked down the hall from the entrance to find about 10 cardboard boxes piled up. Cardboard boxes for a visit to their son's house? It didn't make sense. But leaving them in the hallway would bother other residents. Luckily, none of the boxes were too heavy. And I managed to carry all of them into the living room by myself. Since it's a combined living and dining area, it's quite spacious. Though it was in the way, stacking them up secured enough space to put them. During this time, Eric and his family were sitting and talking. Once you're done moving the boxes, make some coffee. Hurry up, everyone's tired. Overwhelmed by the situation, I reacted reflexively to Eric's command without thinking. Really, what an inconsiderate bride. I'm worried about the future. I'll sleep in this room. While I was confused and making coffee, my sister-in-law declared our bedroom as her room. Ah. That's fine. I'll sleep in the guest room with Mom and Dad. It's been a while since I could sleep with Eric. A family moment without intrusion. They were having a family moment as if I didn't exist. Our house only has the bedroom, a guest room, and what is now Eric's study, which used to be my workroom. Where am I supposed to sleep? And how long will this situation last? It seems when faced with situations far beyond their common sense, people can't think properly. While I was stunned, it was already too late. The next day, or rather, the moment Eric's family barged in, the worst phase of my life began. Hey, isn't the food ready yet? Sorry, I'm preparing it right now. You're so slow. Eric is really patient with such a wife. Eric's family did nothing but laze around the house all day and treated me like a servant. At first, I thought it was just a matter of enduring for a few days, playing the part of a good wife. However, as I overheard conversations between Eric and his family, I realized this was to be a permanent situation, and I had an awakening. The story goes like this. Eric's family had fled from their hometown. The reason was that my sister-in-law had returned home after getting divorced. The cause of the divorce was her infidelity. She had affairs with several men, which eventually all came to light. She was sued for damages by her ex-husband and the wives of her lovers, resulting in debts she couldn't pay, leading her to flee to our place. Eric had told me his family owned their home, but that was a lie. Originally, the house belonged to Eric's maternal grandparents, where the grandparents lived. Eric's parents, who lacked living skills, moved in, and after the grandparents passed away, they just stayed there. The real owner was Eric's maternal uncle, who had been asking them to leave for a long time, but they forcefully stayed. Eric's uncle, having his own place to live, couldn't bring himself to forcibly evict his sister's family, despite repeatedly asking them to leave. When my sister-in-law incurred a mountain of debt from her divorce, Eric's parents decided to sell the house to pay off the debts. Upon learning this, Eric's maternal uncle became furious and threatened legal action, prompting the family to flee with whatever they could carry, ending up at our place. Those 10 cardboard boxes, which I struggled to bring into our home on their arrival day, contained all of Eric's family's possessions. I didn't know nor want to know what was inside those boxes, but it seemed unlikely there was anything of substantial value. Overall, Eric's family had arrived at our doorstep penniless, and now, they seemed to plan on leeching off us indefinitely. Among such a family, Eric was miraculously intelligent. He was able to get a scholarship for college due to his academic abilities. From the outside, he didn't look like a member of such a family at all. He continued to play the role of a refreshing young man, landed a job at a somewhat reputable company, and met and married me. I couldn't see through Eric's true nature or his family's real situation. Now, with no parents of my own, I was completely alone. I have a job and own my home. To Eric, I must have seemed like an easy target. Absolutely not. Now that I know everything, I have no intention of quietly playing the role of a slave. I refuse to be manipulated by such a despicable family. I started thinking about how to fight back and began to take action the next day. For now, I had to act compliant. I couldn't let Eric or his family catch on to my plans. I planned to catch them off guard by acting suddenly, just as they had suddenly come here. I continued to pretend to listen to everything Eric's family said. And about a week later, my sister-in-law demanded something from me. To give me some money. As she said this, she thrust her open right hand towards me. Such a direct approach to mooching. It infuriated me, but I had decided not to resist for now. I handed her a few bills. Is this all? Don't you have more? This is all I have on me right now. Then your card will do. Absolutely not. If I gave her my card, there's no telling how she might misuse it. I can't lend you my card. I'll withdraw some money from the bank tomorrow. So please wait until then. I managed to silence their complaints with that promise. No matter what, I would not hand over my card. That night, after Eric came home, he complained about it. You could have at least lent her your card. You really are greedy. I was astonished by his words but apologized, considering my next steps. I'm sorry. I was worried about the problems it might cause if something happened. What do you mean, if something happened? I was afraid of what might happen. If your family used a card with a different name on it and then got arrested for fraud. Eric seemed satisfied with this reason. Then make a family card for them. I'm counting on you. Understood. I agreed, but I had no intention of actually doing it. About a month later, Eric asked about the status of the family card. Eric's family had asked for money several times. And perhaps they were getting impatient for the card and had urged Eric to ask me about it. Sorry, it seems I can't make one. I said this with feigned disappointment. I hadn't applied for a family card and didn't feel disappointed at all. Why not? They said your family counts as relatives, not immediate family. So they can't be recognized as such. Apparently, it's not possible if they're just living here temporarily. Eric's family had just barged in without any formal arrangements to live together. They haven't transferred their residency registration. So it seems they're not considered to have a residence here. Is that so? He seemed to have no choice but to accept this explanation. Well, then we should just transfer our residency registration. Right, we're going to live here for a long time anyway. I get the paperwork started right away. Incredibly, Eric's family ordered me to handle the procedures. About that, I was thinking. This house might be a bit small if we're going to live here permanently. Now that you mention it, that makes sense. Maybe that's why, Eric, you haven't been coming home much lately. When I said that, Eric made a slightly annoyed face. I've been staying at a hotel because I've been working late due to overtime. Oh, that sounds tough. Thank you for your hard work. That's why I was thinking, why don't we move out of this house? Eric and his family were surprised by my suggestion, their eyes widening. This house was originally bought for me to live alone. And while it was manageable for just the two of us, Eric, it's a bit cramped with the current situation. That's true. Look at this. Wouldn't you like to live in a house like this? I showed them the brochure for a new high-rise apartment in the sub-city center. The brochure featured photos of the top-floor room. It was spacious with large windows offering a view of the city below. Where did you get an apartment like this? I thought it was cramped as it is, so I decided to go for it. I sold this place and bought that one with my grandparents' inheritance and my savings. That sounds good. This place isn't bad, but that one is obviously better. Eric and his sister, who had been looking skeptical, suddenly softened their expressions when they learned the payment was already completed. Well, aren't you thoughtful? I've changed my opinion of you for the first time. Indeed, I might even acknowledge you as our daughter-in-law now. Eric's parents also nodded to each other with smiles. Thus, the move was smoothly agreed upon. About a month later, the day of the move finally arrived. It was a bit sad to say goodbye to the house I had lived in for many years. But it was for a brighter future. After loading the luggage onto 2 trucks, we departed for the destination in 2 taxis. Upon arriving at the Target high-rise apartment and speaking to the concierge, I was handed the keys to the room. We took the elevator reserved for the higher floors to the top floor room. Wow, how lovely. She was the first to dash through the open door, screaming in excitement. Let's get the unpacking done. But no one offered to help. It was expected, yet still infuriating. The movers placed the luggage where instructed, and I proceeded to unpack alone. My room will be a large one. The bride gets the small storage room. My in-laws made such room assignments on their own, but I ignored them and continued my work. The room is really beautiful. It's perfect for our final home. Good for you. Eric and his family were all smiling broadly. It's like a dream to live in such a house. My sister-in-law said with tears in her eyes. It might be time for a revelation. Huh? Whose house are you talking about? Huh? It was a good timing to bring them back to reality. Why would you think you're living here? What are you talking about? This is our new home. It's obvious we're going to live here. What? I feigned shock. This isn't your house. This is the house I bought to live with my grandparents. But you asked if we wanted to live in a house like this. My sister-in-law started making a fuss. Yes, I did ask that. But I only asked if you'd like to live here. Not that you could live here. Just as I said, I never mentioned living together. Who would want to live with these people forever? So, I would like you all to leave immediately. I am the owner of this house, and the landlord is telling you to leave. Please listen without causing any trouble. Don't joke with me. Eric stomped his foot down in anger, his face turning red. You just need to listen to me, because my family and I are going to live in this house. If you don't like it, you can leave.
Yeah.
Get out. That's right, that's right. Eric and his family were pressuring me to leave. I contacted the concierge through the direct intercom on the wall. Excuse me, there are some strange people in my house refusing to leave. And they are trying to evict me, the actual resident. Please come immediately. As soon as I finished speaking, a siren blared inside the room. What's this? So loud. Stop it right now. The guard arrived at the room immediately after the alert. High-end apartments indeed. These are the apartment's guards. If you don't leave now, I'll call the police. Hearing the guard's voice through the intercom at the entrance asking what was happening, Eric's family started to panic, realizing I wasn't lying. Though the guards had arrived, Eric's family was begging them, practically groveling, to listen to their story. I decided to listen out of curiosity. I was curious about what Eric had been telling his family about me. He had been saying I was a pitiful woman with no relatives. Someone who couldn't survive without him, so he was kindly letting me stay. He had also said it was like having a housemaid that they could use as they pleased. I showed mercy to Eric's family, who provided this valuable testimony. Actually, when I had given them money, I made them sign a paper indicating the amount given, effectively making it a loan agreement. I need evidence that I've given it to Eric. Otherwise, I'll get in trouble. If you sign it, I'll give you as much as you need. Thinking they could get money by just writing, Eric's family eagerly signed it. Thanks to this, I had evidence of how much I had lent them. I was considering collecting from Eric's family, but they likely couldn't pay it back. So I decided it was better to get Eric to pay and evict them from the apartment. You've been a great help. If you leave now, I'll consider this matter settled. But if you come back, you'll have to pay everything in full. When I waived the loan agreements, Eric's family finally gave up and left. I'm your husband. I have the right to live here. I'm not leaving. But Eric refused to move, insisting on his rights. If that's what he says, let's settle this here. All right, let's have a little talk. Just know if you try anything strange, I'll call them back immediately. I thanked the guards and asked them to leave for now. Why are you doing this? Didn't you like my family? Of course not. Suddenly showing up like that and treating me like a slave. I firmly told Eric off. All right, I get it. If you don't like them that much, I'll tell my family to leave. But I can stay, right? I was astonished. Eric planned to abandon his family just so he could live here. What a despicable man. No, you'll have to leave as well. Why? We're married, aren't we? I presented a file to Eric. What's this? He turned pale upon seeing the contents of the file. Such a lovely young lady. I hear you've been living with her half of the week recently. It was evidence of Eric's affair. There were countless photos of them walking arm in arm, entering hotels together. Eric had started dating her right after marrying me. I hear you were planning to move into that apartment with her after divorcing me. That's a lie. Who told you such nonsense? I turned on the voice recorder I was holding. The voice of his mistress played, and Eric froze. It was evidence obtained by the private detective. The detective approached the woman, kindly informed her that Eric was married, and recorded what she said. She proudly claimed that Eric was in the middle of divorce proceedings and intended to live with her in Eric's apartment after kicking out his ex-wife. Eric had told his mistress that I refused to agree to a divorce, and that I would soon be tired of being exploited by the in-laws. He believed I would eventually leave quietly. The mistress believed she was the only one Eric loved. claiming that his relationship with his wife had completely cooled off. She laughed, saying that true love would triumph in the end. However, when she found out she was speaking with someone from a detective agency, she panicked and tried to protect herself, claiming she too was deceived by Eric, truly believing his marriage was over. She begged for forgiveness regarding compensation, promising to tell everything she knew. Based on what she revealed, which was more than we had asked for, we recorded everything. That recording contained the entire conversation. So much for true love being fragile. Got the evidence. This sounds like it could lead to a hefty compensation payment, doesn't it? Eric collapsed weakly to the floor. Your belongings have been sent to that woman's apartment, so you can live there from today. Now, please leave. I contacted the concierge again and had Eric, who was still slumped over, removed from the premises. I decided to forgive the mistress for compensation, as she had provided such valuable testimony proving Eric's maliciousness. Thanks to that, I was able to extract a substantial compensation payment from Eric. It was more than enough compensation. In return, I informed her parents and her employer about the situation. Since I hadn't promised to keep it a secret, it was okay to talk about it. The woman was Eric's junior at work. They had gotten closer while working together. It would have been a nice story had they not been married. I complained to the company about what happened, and they apologized for their lack of oversight. The company, concerned about public relations, made the woman resign under the guise of voluntary resignation. And Eric was demoted and transferred from the head office to a subsidiary. The two had lied about being on business to go to hotels and treated their trips as business trips, causing a loss to the company. Given the damage they caused, such measures were only natural. I heard through the grapevine that Eric's family is now truly living together with the woman in her apartment. They're insisting that Eric and the woman take responsibility for their predicament, staying put in the apartment where Eric and the woman had planned to live. Eric and the woman had to take out loans to pay me the compensation. Now, they're barely getting by, repaying their debts. It's probably about time they can't stand it anymore and kick out Eric's family. Eric thought I was a pitiful woman burdened with elderly grandparents in a facility. But the reality is a bit different. My grandparents are indeed in a facility, but it's a luxurious one for affluent people to live comfortably. My grandparents had previously run a company and planned to pass it on to my parents. However, since my parents passed away young, they retired and handed the company to a trustworthy person the year I graduated from college. I've always loved drawing and won many awards since childhood. I told my grandparents I wanted to work with art, so they never forced me to take over the company. They decided to move into that facility to allow me to live freely. I pursued a career related to art as I wished, and am now becoming known as a children's book author. My illustrated books have become hits, making me somewhat of a celebrity. It feels like my luck turned around after divorcing Eric. He must be regretting it now. I bought that high-rise apartment with the money from selling the previous apartment, my parents' inheritance, and my book royalties, wanting to live with my healthy grandparents again. Of course, we'll keep the facility as an option, in case one of my grandparents needs intensive care later on. But for now, they're both healthy. The success of my books has finally allowed me to give back to my grandparents. We'll likely live happily together for a while longer. Despite the trouble caused by Eric, my future looks bright.